I mean, for me, it's like just get a bunch of friends and do a tasting. You could start it out non-blind and just taste side by side. You could do a blind tasting, put them in paper bags or whatever, and like just try different wines, right? And then you're sharing a bunch of different wines with your friends and having a good time, right? And I talked about my tasting group where we had like less than $10 wines for that one time, but we had lots of other tastings, and some friends who weren't that into wine at the time would love to like guess the price or whatever, things like that. And now some of them are really into wine, right? And just, I think that is part of the learning experience, but without necessarily the formality of certifications, which are also a path if you're getting more serious about it. Nothing beats just tasting different wines with your friends and having a good time, because you want to have a good time and you want to try different things, and that's the core of it. Because if you're missing that and it just becomes too academic, then like you're gonna not that passion's not gonna spark.
Welcome, everyone, back to the Barrels and Roots podcast. I'm your host, Sean Trace, and I have an awesome guest with me today. Can you tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm Peter Yeung. Right now, I'm the CEO of Wente Vineyards in Livermore, California. I'm also the co-author of Luxury Wine Marketing, the sort of textbook, if you will, or practitioner's guide to how selling high-end wine is different from what I'd call more commercial wine, and also the producer and host of the XChateau Wine Business Podcast, which is all about the business of wine.
That's awesome. How did you get into wine? What was it that started you down this path?
Well, some people say it's boring to talk too long about this topic, but my first memory of wine was when I don't know how old I was, probably about 10, and we were in Europe together. My family on my mom's side is actually wine and spirits distributors in Singapore, and so we went with my uncle who was running the company around Europe, and apparently went to a few wineries and wine tastings. So my first memory of wine was my family tasting wine, I think it was either in Alsace or in Germany. And everyone was tasting and spitting, and my dad sort of was just tasting and drinking. So I just remember pinching his stomach and saying, "You're doing it wrong." That's my first memory. And then I kind of always enjoyed it. I liked it more in college and everything. And then when I was a consultant at a McKinsey company, I took a sabbatical in the middle of my tenure and studied wine with Karen McNeil at the Culinary Institute of America. They used to have a wine program there, and did a wine immersion course for like 6 weeks, which was one of the best times in my life. And, that interest became more of a passion, and I worked my way back into it all the way into like working into the industry.
That's awesome. Did you find that it was easy to get into the field? Like this was a path that just opened up for you, or was it something that took time and a lot of energy and, a lot of kind of elbow grease to start opening the doors?
It was definitely harder than I expected. I came from a business background, had some success there, and I thought maybe like the bigger companies would be more open to having me in. And this was different because this was about 13 years ago, I guess. The wine industry was very more like inside versus outside. And people were like, "Oh, well, you've never worked in wine. You don't understand XYZ things." I'm like, well, in my mind, I'm like, I can learn. But there's also, just a match of expectations. And so it was much harder back then. I did a sort of what I consider a classic McKinsey thing. I talked to many different people, and, those people introduced me to other people, and just kept, getting that until I got connected to someone who was running a small, a couple small wineries. And first it started out as sort of like a free project just to get experience in the industry. I did get a case of wine, which included like half of it was like old Sauvignon Blanc, but that turned into like a consulting project, which then became like working full-time but getting paid sort of like a part-time salary. And then once we acquired, or our investors acquired, Costa Brown, it became a much bigger platform that which I could work off of and sort of be paid a full-time salary for.
It's interesting too, because like some many fields, it's like you can step in and it's what you know and you're able to like make waves. But with wine, there's a lot of relationships. There's a lot of like people, I don't know, it feels the wine industry in ways, in a positive and negative way, feels slower. Slower in the way that it's still done, I mean, grapes are grown slowly. The whole process is a slower process. And to me, I found that, even when I do this podcast, there's intentionality in the wine industry, and that can be great, but it can also mean things move very slowly and change happens slowly as well,
This is absolutely true, that agrarian farmer mindset when, a vine takes 3 years after planting to bear its first fruit, and 6 years to get your full harvest. And then winemaking can take anywhere from a year to 10 years for like Vega Sicilia, right? So it's a very long intentional process. And I think that slows people down. It reminds me of when I, was studying in Napa for that period of time. I felt very like anxious because everything moves so slowly there. And then after several weeks, I kind of was able to slow down and get into it, and that was a relaxing part of it. But part of why I stay in San Francisco is to keep one foot in technology and in sort of a faster paced thing, and get out of the bubble that can sometimes be in the wine industry, because the wine industry is relatively small. Not everyone eats food. Not everyone drinks alcohol, and even a smaller portion of people who drink alcohol drink wine, right? So it's a relatively small, compact industry, and because of that, like things tend to move slowly and is very relationship based, as you said.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you this because you've spent years studying both the business and culture of wine. Why do you think wine fascinates people so much compared to other drinks?
Well, compared to other drinks, I think there's just so much complexity to it, whether that's, the geology, biology, chemistry of the production of wine, to the culture, the history, the dynamism of many different countries around the world that grow and make it, and that it's different. So this notion of terroir, or where wine comes from and is made, and how like the same grape made somewhere else tastes very different. I've had a Pinot Noir from like Mount Etna in Sicily that tastes like very salty, like very saline, right? To ones that are very fruity, and to very, more leafy, herbal kind of things. And it's that complexity, I think, really engages people. And it's like constant, nonstop learning, even though it moves very slowly. In ways, it moves very quickly, because you look at things like the re-rise, I should say, or re-emergence of the Georgian wine industry, Georgia, the country, not the state, and how it's pushing forward on an international basis, to things coming out of Uruguay to Chile and South Africa and all over the world, right, where there's a deep history associated with it, as well as like lots of changes that are happening, but the changes aren't overnight. They're not as fast as technology, but they do take, decades to kind of play out.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so interesting as well because, I remember growing up in the Napa Valley, and there was a time that I saw this vineyard pulled out. And it was at the time that phylloxera was a big deal in the valley, and they were pulling out just a whole vineyard, whole sections of vineyards, and then replanting. And I was just like blown away by, oh my goodness, look at that whole vineyard that's been ripped out. But then they replanted, and saw it, and I was like, oh wow, it just takes so much time. But a couple years pass, and then it comes back, and then now those vines are established, going. But it takes time. But it takes the time the same way. Watching my daughter learn piano takes time. I bought my daughter a piano. We didn't buy her a piano. She started learning piano about 5 years ago, on my wife's 20-something-year-old electric piano. Old, but really nice electric piano. And she started on that. She kept going. And then finally, she, after 5 years, the one day suddenly I turn around and she's playing Bach. And I was just like, well, hello. That's special, And wine to me is such a beautiful thing too, because it's love, it's effort, it's time. But then one day you turn around and you have something beautiful there. And I wanted to ask you this, like, as someone who's um, in this process of making wine, what is your favorite part of the journey of the process?
Oh, that's interesting. I think the journey is fantastic all the way around. Our winemaker sat me down and we tasted through a whole flight of Chardonnays from Arroyo Seco, and he was showing me how we have some like viticulture issues, like in some of the regions and things like that, and that's just a fascinating process. And then like as a problem solving effort, like they've tried this and that and whatever, and like, okay, so what are the other reasons? How are we going to fix this problem so that we don't have problems in the future where we have to declassify wines or other things? So the investment up front to make it happen, but there's a complexity to that issue that's fun for people who love problem solving, and doing that all the way down to I could say that I'm relatively hedonistic. I do love the joy of tasting the complex beverage, and I love the joy of moderate alcohol consumption, and the feel of that. I was in the Master of Wine program for a long time, and before the tasting exam, I wouldn't drink for months. Like I would just taste and spit to try to keep my mind as sharp as possible. And then, after taking the exam, we all go out and drink, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, that's right, I do like alcohol. It's all those parts are fun from the beginning to the end. I think I'm not sure that I have a favorite.
If someone who doesn't know anything about wine were to ask you, what does a wine executive actually do, how would you explain it to them?
Well, you just sit here and stare at a vineyard and drink wine, right? I mean, isn't that the goal and the dream? But it's like running any other business, right? You're dealing with HR issues and finance issues. And the difference is the production side and the product and the passion around it. And usually in many wineries, a team of people who really love wine. It's not like I worked in the energy industry and utilities before, and there are a lot of people who are doing that as a job and not really passionate about what they're doing and the service that they're providing. In wine, it's quite often that many people are passionate about the product and about wine and about not just how special the product is, but how it brings people together and creates joy, right? And that's I think what makes it special.
I love that. To me, I think about there is this thing that is so special about wine and wineries that I can't imagine many other jobs that you get to show up and work in such an amazingly beautiful place with such amazingly interesting products. Think about it. Like, if you're selling a vacuum cleaner, I mean, no hate to vacuum cleaner salesmen, no hate on vacuum cleaners, but you probably don't go to work every day. Yeah, they are important, but you don't go to work every day in such a cool type of a place. So many wineries that I just have been, you walk in there and it's just like, wow, this is amazing. And granted, the offices don't always look like the guest areas, but still, it's a pretty amazing place, And then on the flip side as well, you're selling something that truly, vacuum cleaners can bring people joy, don't get me wrong. But, wine really brings people joy. A good vacuum cleaner also brings extreme joy. I understand. But, you've talked a lot about luxury wine. What makes a wine luxurious? Is it the taste, the story, the price, or something else?
Well, let me make a little comment on your other piece before. There's also a downside to it in that, like, because it is intrinsically special to be part of wine, right, in the wine industry, it tends to pay less. than if you're in tech or other types of industries. So there is that element of it that you have to accept. And that's why I think passion is really important if you're going to be in wine, because you're willing to accept that lower compensation for the most part for it. To me, it's a lot like the entertainment industry, where there is an intrinsic value to want to be a part of it. It's cool to be part of movies or TV shows or whatnot. And most of the people there get paid below average, right? Below like average if they were doing something else, but they want to do it. And then you have a few people who are celebrities and whatnot that make a ton of money, right? And wine is not dissimilar from that at times. But to your point about what makes a wine luxurious, well, obviously in luxury wine marketing, there's a definition of six different things that are like where it comes from. It's scarcity, it's product quality and all that. But luxury products in general are ones that are differentiating, right? They like their purpose as a whole category, not just wine, is to kind of differentiate a little. And that's what takes it from just a craft product to a luxury product. So I always like to use the example of, I see a lot of, I've often seen a lot of retailers send out emails about like, oh, I got this 100-point wine and whatnot. And I kind of always seen it top out around or be on average about $300 a bottle. But there are many wines that sell for beyond $300 a bottle, right? So what's the difference between that? And a lot of that is the brand equity, right? So it's no longer about the craft. It's almost like if you think craft takes you to like 300 a bottle and you reach that level of perfection, right? Of perfection of a 100-point wine. And then when you scale beyond that, that's luxury. And now you're, where you're paying more for the brand and to be associated with it. I use the example of like the Birkin bag, which I probably couldn't tell what one looked like if I saw one in the street, but many women could, right? And they know if they see someone else with one, they're like, oh, wow, they have a Birkin bag. That's something special, which imparts some level of specialness on that person. And luxury products that's sort of their purpose in a way. And so luxury wines have the same kind of association with that.
It's interesting too, because I talk about, oftentimes we'll talk to people about the importance of making wine accessible. But like, it's interesting too, because there is a beautiful place for premium products, and it's interesting because I have this fun analogy that I feel like the wine industry has gone kind of one direction, but there's an importance in that direction. Let me explain. Let's talk about cars for a second, because it's something I can relate to. The automobile market has Hondas and Toyotas and Kias and Hyundais and Chevys and Fords, but it also has Bugattis and Lamborghinis and Ferraris and all of this. And it feels like for a while, the wine industry has gone, well, let's focus on all the Ferraris and the, and the Lamborghinis, and the Hondas are kind of, where are the Hondas? And so it's like, it's challenging for people to get into wine. But here's one of the things that I want people to understand is that just like the automobile industry, we want Hondas and Toyotas and Chevys and Fords, but we also want Lamborghinis. But what I hope people can learn, and what I want to learn and have my guests learn, is what's the difference between a Lamborghini and a Chevy when it comes to wine? Like, that's my core question, because, dude, yes, Lamborghinis, yes. Do I want to drink a Lamborghini of wine? Yes. But how do I know it's a Lamborghini? I see a 100-point score. What does that even mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, wine has everything too, right? We've got our Hondas and Hyundais and Kias, right? We have Charles Shaw to XXL to, Carlo Rossi or whatever, right? Like everything. We've got the whole spectrum as well. And I think, there's to the point of craft, there's an element of it's a better made product, right? And this is where professionals use the kind of acronym like BLIC or BLICA, right? Where the wine tastes more balanced, it has longer length, more intensity, more complexity, more concentration. And when you taste it, and that's why a lot of people who, I don't know if you have this, but I have like an epiphany wine, right? A wine where you tried it once and all of a sudden it just like blows your mind, right? And all of a sudden you fall in love with wine, right? For me, it was a Barolo that I had in college, right? And I remember opening this in my room and the whole room filling with the smell, the aromas,
Yep.
right? And so like to this day, I still, even though when people ask me what's my favorite wine, I'm like, I like a lot of different types of wines, right? But aromatic Nebbiolos still have a special place in my heart because of that. And I still really enjoy those types of wines, and it's very complex. And so I think when you start tasting them side by side, it makes a difference. You know, in one of my tasting groups way back when, 15 years ago, we did a whole bunch of like cheap wines, you know, like less than $10 bottles from Trader Joe's, and then we put one like $20 Malbec in there, right? And it was easy to point out. All the other ones, no matter what the variety was, kind of tasted the same. You could kind of taste it. They were the Kias, right? They all looked the same. And, you know, the Kia and the Hyundai were basically the same car, right?
Yeah.
But the one, you know, $20 one, which it's not a Ferrari or Lamborghini, but like stood out and tasted different and tasted a lot better with more complexity and everything else. And granted, just like with cars, I think wine over time, the technology has improved, and even the bottom end is getting better, right? A lot better, because the science and the technology of viticulture and winemaking have all improved to the point where, you know, it's harder to make bad wine. But like there's still a big differentiation to like what's at the top. And, you know, we only get to see it sometimes. And can be sad, I guess, is that, you know, it is hard to sometimes actually experience some of that. But I mean, I guess as a person who drives a car, I've driven some nice cars, but definitely nothing like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or something like that. And I'd probably crash it if I did or not know what to do with it. So, you know, wine could be similar in that way. And sometimes, you know, you want to share like the best wines with people who actually appreciate it. But one of the great things about people who love wine, not just people in the wine industry, but wine collectors and people who love wine, is that if you express interest, almost always someone is willing to share something special with you.
Yeah. Right. I remember oh my God, wine. I was in college, and there was I was working at Meadowood, and this resort in the Napa Valley, Pool Terrace Cafe. I was a college student, and we were down there, and some guy came down to the pool. I don't know why he was rocking it this hard, but he came to the pool, and he had a bottle of Screaming Eagle. And he rocked it out, and he had a glass, and then he's like, "You guys have the rest." And we were like, "What?" And I mean, that was a coming to God moment right there, where I was like, wow. And it was like someone taking me for a ride in a Lamborghini at 21 years old. And then suddenly I became a car guy, you know? And like, it was that I'm not in a place that I can drink Screaming Eagle every day. But I can tell you this, that I know how awesome it is. And I'm glad that I've had that experience. Just like I'm not driving, you know, my go-to commuter is not, you know, a Lamborghini, but I can tell you that I appreciate it. And, you know, if someone ever wants to say, "Hey, Sean, you want a daily commuter?" I'd be like, "Well, yes, I do." Yes, I do. But I want to ask you this, because I want to ask you, why do you think so many people feel intimidated or excluded by wine culture?
I think the intimidation, I mean, that part is simple. You go to even just a grocery store shelf and you look at the wall and you're just like, what is this? Like, because it's so fragmented, even though, you know, like the top 10 companies probably produce 80% of the wine, or whatever the number is, 70%. I don't know the exact number. But the number of brands and even types within a brand, you know, associated that, at Wente, we must make like 50 or 65 different wines, right? Like, it's incredibly complex and challenging. And because often many of the wines come from like a certain place or spot or whatever, you have the different varieties. Like, what do all the variety names mean? If you don't know wines, like what's a Merlot versus Cabernet Sauvignon? How do I know? And this is where it's hard, because the the scale of just in the complexity, especially in the US, where there's like a 3-tier system where you have the supplier, producer, the distributor, and the retailer. There's a lot of and it's different state by state. So it's complexity. It's very complex to get even the same product in all places, even in the same store, right? So if you go to a Target in San Francisco, you're going to have a different selection than a Target in Park City, Utah, right? Or it won't be sold in Park City, Utah, but like, so it'll be a government store. But in like Michigan or wherever, and like, that makes it hard to just know what to trust, what to go after. And so brands are still important in that way. If you say, oh, I know I like the Mondavi style, maybe I'll buy that. Or I know I like, Wente or Josh or whatever, like, let me buy that. But when you just look at that wall, whether it's at a grocery store, whether it's at a fine wine store, it's you can tell why there's complexity. I think Vivino still has the opportunity to like, have some scan, right? Where you're just, instead of taking a picture, it's just looking at the wall and then popping up the scores, right? Like kind of an augmented reality to help you choose what you want, ideally based on your own personal preferences. At least surfacing like their user scores or something like that, right? Like that would make it a little bit easier. But I think that complexity of variety, number of producers, number of different wines, I think at one point I looked at some research that said there was something like 300,000 wine brands in the world, right? It's just like, that's crazy, right? And you got some even in North America. It's a little bit lower now, but in North America, we peaked at about 12,000 wineries. Right? Wow. 9,000 of which were 5,000 cases or less. So tiny. Tiny, right? So like, most people don't even know what Scream Eagle is, right? Because it's tiny. I mean, they make 1,500 cases a year. So you don't, and they don't have, we don't have the F1 equivalent that Ferrari has, right? To make everyone know what Ferrari is because of, the races and the media associated with F1. And those small businesses, even a Scream Eagle is a relatively small business, can't spend the money on like advertising or building the dream or other things like a Louis Vuitton or Hermes or something like that, right? So it's, I think that's what makes it intimidating, is just that they don't know. And to be frank, not enough people in the industry are showing enough transparency around maybe what the wine style is, because you have things like Syrah, things like Chardonnay, or you could have things like Riesling, where you can have very different styles that when you read the package look like they should taste the same. Right? It's like the same variety from the same region. Shouldn't this taste similar? But one might be oaked, one might be unoaked, one might be sweet, one might be dry, right? Like you just don't know. And from a consumer who doesn't know, they're like, I didn't like that one, but I really like this other one, and it's hard for me to tell. And so adding more transparency to the packaging, whether that's ingredients, nutritional panel, flavor profile, I think is an important step that the wine industry could take to make it easier for consumers to be less intimidated.
Right. It's interesting too, because I was talking to people that were from really cool established wineries, but they were smaller places, like you'd mentioned. And when I was talking about, this podcast and sharing some video and some clips, and one of the owners was like, oh, that's great, because I'm doing all of our social, I'm doing all of our marketing. I was like, what? Like, you have this brand that I sit there and think of as like, wow type of a winery. And this person's like, yeah, I'm the owner and I'm also doing the social media. And I was just like, not just social, but the entire marketing department was the owner. And I was just, and you don't realize that these are places that are figuring it out as they go in such a traditional field, and the world has changed, And I wanted to ask you this. You've worked in strategy, finance, marketing, and wine. How much of the wine industry is really about storytelling and emotion instead of just the liquid itself? And does the wine industry need to get into 2026,
I think that there's two, the wine industry to me is two markets. You have the commercial wine, which is more like classic CPG, right? And you have classic CPG channels. You're in the grocery stores, big box stores in general, and then you kind of have like fine wine. And in fine wine, there's more craft. It's about storytelling and whatnot. In commercial wine, it is more like packaging with some storytelling to that associated with it, where it's packaging, price, like what does the label look like? That's going to drive like pull more than anything else off the shelf. And, in that case, people are building wine for what a customer wants, just like any CPG product. And sometimes that might include some element of its story, whether that's sustainability, whether that's, the packaging or association with a celebrity or, music or whatnot. Versus like the other side, fine wine side, is more craft oriented. So it really hinges on both the story of whether it's often in wine, we're pretty boring, I guess, or pretty monoculture. We're either talking about the person and the founder and their story and why they're special, or if you own land, you're talking about the land and how that's special, the terroir. As well as, often what's in the bottle. And this is where like the rating system comes into play, right? And so what's in a bottle proxied by the quality, proxied by some sort of critic score, can be, important as well. So I think the storytelling is different for each side, but somewhat important for both. But then what's in the bottle tends to be more important for the fine wine side than sort of the commercial side, where many of the products actually taste very similar. As I told you, the tasting group I had of wines under $10 back then, like many of the wines taste very similar.
It's so interesting too, because one of the things that I'm fascinated by is the way that wines can, I'm fascinated by the ranking system, by the reviews and all that, because I'm curious, and something like taste and a score, because for me, all right, I'm going to go a different direction right now. Movies. Last weekend, I went to see Mandalorian and Grogu with my daughter. Friggin' loved it. Like, we had so much fun. We went in 4DX. The chairs are shaking. We were having a blast. And granted, it was something that was fun. It wasn't super, like, you can follow the story. It didn't have to have any like crazy Oscar-winning plot, but it was a great movie. And we loved it. And the audience score, so high. But the critic score, so low, The critics are like, what is this? Star Wars is now dead, And it's just like, are you guys for real? In the wine industry, when I read a score, how do I know if the critic score is right, or is there something else? Or is it just about going out and finding what you love?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of similarities to that. That's a great analogy, right? So you might have some wines that some critics really love and give a high score, but that is maybe not to the preference of many consumers, right? And they may not like that style of wine, because I think the critic score ideally is meant to be like an objective look at the quality of a wine, but so wines have so many different styles, and what people like is generally associated with the style of wine they like, right? Some people love big, heavy, tannic wines. And so, objectively, you might give this wine from Napa 98-point score or whatever, because in that, it's a really well-made wine, but it's a wine that's big, heavy, tannic, and someone who doesn't like that style of wine is going to drink it and be like, "Oh, this is terrible," right? Like they don't know what to do with it. They might like sweet, and some of that is physiology, right? Like Tim Hanai, MW, has done a lot of work around like that physiology, and so like it's based on like the concentration of taste buds on your tongue, which usually settles out around adolescence. And so the higher the concentration, the more you're like a quote unquote super taster. But what that means is that you're really sensitive to bitter. And so wine is, acid water with like different small amount of other chemicals in there, and red wine often with tannin in there, and tannin is very bitter, right? Just like it is in tea or coffee. So if you drink your coffee with a lot of sugar and milk, it's because you probably really dislike the bitter, right? And so you might not like that style of wine. Someone who doesn't have that issue or that same, sensitivity to that might really love it and be able to more appreciate all the different complexities of flavor profiles that are in it, right? And really draw that out. And so really like that wine. So the score is meant to be, I think, in the ideal world, like a proxy of um, objective quality. Not It shouldn't be, although it often is associated with the styles that that individual person likes as a wine critic itself. But ideally, it's just your quality, your objective quality, and then for a consumer, you have to understand what styles of wine do I like, and that's the point about the transparency. What is the flavor profile? Do I like unoaked Chardonnay versus very oaky Chardonnay, right? Like all that the simple example to be like, yeah, both wines might be a 94 point score. One might be 95, but I don't like that style, so I prefer this 89 point or 88 point wine, right? That's in a style that I like. And so, I think the wine style is so important that matches to what you like as a person. I think that's sort of like the key to figuring out what wines you like and appreciate.
I love that. I think it's interesting too because everyone has different flavors and tastes they like. And I think that journey of figuring that out is something that takes time, and you have to just get in there and taste wine. You got to figure out what is your Mandalorian and Grogu that you like and everyone else doesn't, or
Yeah.
the critics don't, But I find that the wine industry is changing a lot right now. And they're, when I come back, one of the things that was wild for me was like how, especially Gen Z, when my wife and I were staying at a hotel in San Jose for a show that she had. And like when we had our window open while we were sleeping, because it was nice and cool outside, the smell of weed was intense. It was just like the whole street smelled like weed. And I was like, we are like 5, 6 stories up, and it smelled so like we had just been like walked into some type of like, I don't know, pot shop or something. And I was just like, this is nuts. But the younger generation has the different trends. But like, what do you think the younger generations want from wine that older generations sometimes miss?
I think the older generations were often interested in like the physical collection, and the younger generations tend to want more experiences. And part
Yeah.
of this is, especially when we say older generation now, we're often talking about the baby boomers, which are like one of the richest generations to exist so far in human history. And so they had the money to have bigger spaces, to have like, a wine cellar, place to store and put the wine. Whereas, a lot of younger generations, millennial, Gen Z, have had a harder time building wealth, harder time getting jobs. So their wealth creation path has been slower. And so they don't have the space to do all that stuff. And they, would rather spend their money on experiences because one, they don't have any place to put the wine or store it, right? Or do anything like that. And they want to get out and do things because that's been a relatively less expensive way of enjoying life than having a big house and other things, and one that they can afford. Although I think, a lot of those experiences are now getting priced up because there's been more demand for them. But I think that's a lot of it. I think millennials, I think the research would show, Wine Market Council has a lot of research around this, but that millennials are starting to pick up wine now. And my hypothesis is that getting into wine, and just from personal experience, I mean, I was always into wine, but like, is heavily correlated with family formation, which has been delayed, right? So there's certainly a wealth accumulation. Back in the global financial crisis, I did a study, an analysis on like what is correlated with the premiumization of wine and the increase of people buying up for wine. And it was like net wealth lagged by a year. So like you have more money in the bank, you pay your taxes on it, and now it's like, okay, I feel richer now. I can buy a $40 bottle instead of $20 bottle. But then like the family formation part, I think is different. That's shrinking the wine market because once you have, before when you're still looking for a partner or without kids, right? What do? You want to go out and have the experiences, have fun. You go out to clubs and bars and things like that, or concerts and whatever it is. And you're often drinking beer or spirits because wine is kind of tough to consume and not quickly. Wine is a slower beverage. And so you're buying more beer and spirits, and then once you have children, you kind of are at home more, right? And like it's harder to go to restaurants and things like that, and most people tend to move into the suburbs, so they have a little more space and all that sort of thing. And then they can embrace wine because it's less time consuming but more complex and interesting than drinking beer or straight spirits, because your cocktail takes a lot of work. Maybe in the pandemic people were making cocktails all the time, but like normally times, and if you have little kids, you don't have the time to like make a complex cocktail. But wine is a complex drink that you can pair with food. So people come over, they're usually bringing wine is still like a common thing, and hanging out with your families more at home. And I think that's the opportunity for wine to really like get in there with people who are, starting to have families and all that sort of thing.
So interesting. Well, I want to ask you this because you helped launch the Asian Wine Association of America. Why is it important for the wine world to become more culturally diverse and inclusive?
Well, I think wine, as we talked about earlier, is a luxury product, and it can be, and people, as they gain more wealth around the world, are starting to embrace wine and all that. But it's not associated historically with all these other cultures, right? And so it's a huge missed opportunity. If you think about wine drinkers being less represented, whether that's Asian people, Hispanic, African American, etc. Like, if we just brought them up to average, we'd have hundreds of thousands of more wine consumers, in the place. And then you think about like the on-trade, like restaurants, right? And how many Asian restaurants have either no wine or no alcohol or a terrible selection, right? Because it's just not culturally, historically relevant. And there's so many new experiences that we could have. And I think that would elevate the experience, elevate the business, elevate the opportunities for people to enjoy life and for people to experience new things. So, one of the things we're doing at Wente is actually doing an ethnic food and wine pairing that's like
awesome.
Different ethnicities, so that we can engage more people in the culture. And part of it is like engaging more people. There's a big South Asian, a population around Livermore, and so some of it's to engage them and show them the magic of like food and wine together and how it could work with their very spiced and cuisine. But also like everybody just, I love to eat all sorts of different types of food, right? And I love wine. And so like those are such understudied areas, that food and wine combo, especially with Asian food and wine together, that if we put some more effort and some more study and research and like just experience against that and populate it out, how much better would our lives be, right? If we could actually enjoy that more and not have to like skip on it because the restaurant doesn't have any good wines by the glass or anything that tastes good, or that we don't know how to deal with it or pair with it at home even, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity for the industry and just for people in general to learn how to appreciate things and to elevate their experience. And what's most important about wine, like making friends with people who drink it together. It's a shared experience. A bottle of wine is not generally something you consume by yourself, but it's that 750 ml is kind of sized to be perfect to share with 2 or 3 people, right? And to like have this shared experience, and you don't have to talk about it, but you're kind of consuming the same product. And if you want to talk about it, because there's some interesting notion, there's an interesting story to tell, the product itself has some complexity, the match with food has some complexity to it, like all those things can help create friendships that I think make wine a special product in that way.
Yeah, right. Well, I want to ask you this too, because you know if someone listening is overwhelmed by wine and doesn't know where to begin, but they would love to learn about it. Where is the best and simplest way and most enjoyable way to start exploring it?
I mean, for me, it's like just get a bunch of friends and do a tasting. You could start it out non-blind and just taste side by side. You could do it blind tasting, put them in paper bags or whatever, and like just try different wines, right? And then you're sharing a bunch of different wines with your friends and having a good time, right? And I talked about my tasting group where we had like less than $10 wines for that one time, but we had lots of other tastings, and some friends who weren't that into wine at the time would love to like guess the price or whatever, things like that.
Yeah.
And now some of them are really into wine, right? And just, I think that is part of the learning experience, but without necessarily the formality of certifications, which are also a path if you're getting more serious about it. You could do all the certifications, whether it's, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, or even Wine Folly's got classes more for like non-professionals and things like that. And that's all great and helps you like learn and understand, but nothing beats just tasting different wines with your friends and having a good time, because you want to have a good time and you want to try different things, and that's the core of it. Because if you're missing that and it just becomes too academic, then like you're gonna not that passion's not gonna spark.
100%, man. Well, where can people go to learn more about you and what you do and the wine that you make?
Yeah, for the wine that we make, that's just wentevineyards.com and Google, and certainly like the XChateau Wine Business Podcast is a great way to explore the business side of wine, which most people don't talk about that much. And then if people are interested in what Asian Wine Association of America is doing, I think it's awaawine.org, and learning how to support both Asian food and wine together, but Asian owned and Asian owned wineries or winemakers.
I love that, man. Well, I appreciate you and you taking the time, man. This has been a fun masterclass. And one last question. If you were to pour 3 glasses for someone right now that was getting into wine, what 3 glasses would you pour?
Ooh, that was just getting into wine, huh?
Yeah.
I would probably pour like one of my, I don't drink a lot of Burgundy because it's super expensive, but you didn't give me a budget here, right? So like, like a Chambol Musigny, a Pinot from Burgundy. I love the softness and the floralness of that appellation, against like, probably like a higher end class growth Bordeaux, maybe from Pauliac or something. And then like, one of the stalwart Italian wines, like I said, like a Barolo Barbaresco, just that gives you kind of like the areas of the world, of the classic wine regions of the world, to see like how that plays against your palate,